Mind you, there are beautiful men. Cha Eun-woo, is that you? Hey there, Zesties! Welcome to the Gleeful Talk Show, where we share zesty stories to cultivate the happiness and hero within. It's already half the year of 2022, and where did all that month go? Or year go, I'd say. It has been a very tumultuous year for me, to say the least, but that's life, and whatever it is, it needs to be celebrated. Speaking of celebration, this month is all about Pride celebration. Yes, Zesties, happy Pride Month, you all! So, this episode is dedicated to our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual communities out there. This month commemorates the years of struggle for civil rights and the ongoing pursuit of equal justice under the law for LGBTQIA plus individuals. The organized pursuit of their rights in the U.S. dates back to 1924 through the Society of Human Rights in Chicago, founded by Henry Gerber. First things first, why is June celebrated as Pride Month? Well, Zesties, there's an event that catalyzed it all. On the 28th of June of 1969 in Greenwich Village at the Stonewall Inn, the police raided a popular gathering place for young members of the LGBTQIA plus community and arrested the youngsters for selling liquor without a license, roughing up the patrons, and clearing the bar. The bystanders outside the bar who saw how the youngsters were treated got enraged and started to throw coins and then bottles and then debris at all of them, forcing the police to barricade themselves in the bar to wait for backup. It became a riot, in which around 400 people participated. Although the police have dispersed the crowd, people still gathered outside the bar for the next 5 days or so to demonstrate their outcry. These Stonewall riots, also called the Stonewall Uprising, ignited the LGBTQIA plus rights movement in the US. Back then, it was still LGBTQI plus, so there was an evolution to the terminology, but I'll get on to that later. It should also be noted, Zesties, that the 4 years prior to this uprising, activists in Philadelphia had staged protests outside the Independence Hall on the 4th of July, which is the U.S. Independence Day, as annual reminders that gays and lesbians were being denied basic rights of citizenship. Can you imagine being denied of your basic rights in this day and age? It must have been horrible back then. Although there has been improvement now, but there's still a long way to go. During this annual reminder, because they gathered outside the Independence Hall, there's so many constraints on these demonstrations. The men were required to wear business-appropriate clothing, the women were called upon to don skirts and blouses, and public displays of affection were forbidden. Again, I can't imagine marching in business attire, really. So, on the 2nd of November 1969, the idea of march in response to the Stonewall events was proposed. At the anniversary of the Stonewall event, 28th of June 1970, the procession was named the Christopher Street Liberation Day March after the street that was the epicenter of NYC's LGBTQ community and the place where the procession would begin. So, initially, the slogan that was proposed was quote-unquote gay power, but since the movement had yet to be politically empowered, they have renamed it appropriately as Gay Pride, as its members felt great pride in their sexuality. Not sure about the exact number of those who marched that day. It ranged from 1,000 to 20,000, but it started at only a few hundreds. By the time the march ended, 51 blocks north in Central Park's Sheep Meadow, its numbers had swelled dramatically as individuals joined the procession en route to solidarity, chanting the slogan, "Say it clear, say it loud, gay is good, gay is proud." This march marks as the world's first permitted parade advocating for gay rights, which was staged in LA, and Gay In was held in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. What's very interesting was that the day before the Pride March in New York, some 150 people in Chicago capped off a week-long event with the country's first march commemorating Stonewall. Therefore, gay pride or LGBTQ pride generally became to be celebrated on the last Sunday in June. After some time, this became a month-long event and became officially recognized by the US government when President Bill Clinton declared June 1999 as Gay and Lesbian Pride Month, and Biden expanded it to LGBTQIA plus Pride Month. Here in Australia, it's also being celebrated in June, but the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras is held in the warmer months of February and March, although the origins began in June too. There is also the Sydney Pride Festival that launched in June at the Stonewall Hotel last 2nd of June and will run through 30th of June. This year's theme is Be Brave, Be Strong, Be You, which is about empowering each other. And I guess it's also not only for the community as well, right? But it's for everyone. But it's much more special because the community right now is still fighting for their rights to be recognized and to be just treated as equal individuals. On 27th of June 1978, the first Sydney Mardi Gras was held with more than 500 people gathered to march down Oxford Street in commemoration of the Stonewall riots, calling for the decriminalization of homosexuality, which was still illegal in New South Wales at that time. Unbelievable. Being homosexual as illegal back in the day, I can't really imagine how horrible it was. However, some religions still find it taboo. Back then, the police broke up the march and arrested 53 people who were called 78ers as the first ones who did the march. Their names were published in the newspapers, and some lost their jobs, homes, even loved ones, and some to the point of being forced to leave the country. That is so brutal. Although the LGBTQIA plus rights have come a long way since then in Australia and all over the world, there is still more work to do, which is why Pride Month is important. You need to voice it out. In the Philippines, being gay or lesbian is celebrated amongst friends and peers, but in terms of family dynamics, it still has a long way to go. There are still families, parents that are, I'd say, conventional. It's quite a common story where the father might have been in the military and the son might be gay. Usually, the son will find it hard to come out because the father will not approve of it, or they would feel that the father will be ashamed of them, even though they wouldn't know if the father might be okay about it. So it's going to be a bit harder. And I know someone actually whose father is a captain of the ship, or I'd say a marine engineer. Well, we usually call them seamen as an umbrella term in the Philippines. And my friend really had a hard time coming out, especially that his father wanted him to be a seaman or a marine engineer as well. And mind you, being a seaman is considered a very manly profession in the Philippines. I don't know about here in Australia or in the US or any other Western country, but in the Philippines, it's really like a very manly profession. And to the point that it's kind of like a common joke in terms of, not a joke, but it's quite common to perceive marine engineers or seamen to be very polygamous, I'd say. So, and then polygamy equals man. So there's a bit of a double standard there, unfortunately. So I do commend him because he owned it. He's now a marine engineer who wears Hermes bags on his free time, if you know what I mean. His colleagues call him Madame Engineer. And even though he's gay, his pronoun is he, as far as I know. And I'm not sure if it has changed since then. And by the way, in the Philippines, bisexuality and even gender fluidity is not quite common. I'm not sure why, but maybe I'm just not aware or don't know anyone who is. Although being gay in the Philippines is quite celebrated, the legislation has still a long way to go as well. Although there's a separation between church and state in theory, but I think in the Philippines, it's not that big of a separation. And I remember there was a big issue back then about someone who was transgender or who identified as a woman who went to the women's public restroom in the mall. And unfortunately, the other women made a commotion about it. It was that big of an issue that it seemed to go to the Senate. I'm not entirely sure of the details, but what I was sure of is that it became such a big of an issue. Apparently, the other women in the toilet thought that they might get raped by the queer person. I mean, hello, people really need to be more aware of these gender expressions and gender identities because ignorance sometimes can be offensive. There is a significant gap between LGBTQIA plus mental health outcomes in comparison to the general population, and I agree a lot could have been underreported. I feel like when you are handed out a form that asks for gender, it might be good to ask for gender identity. In Australia, research suggests that from the LGBTQIA plus community, 5.2% people aged 18 and over reported having attempted suicide compared to the 1.1% of the general population. That is a huge difference. And mind you, most often, surveys could sometimes be underrepresented or underreported. And what can we do in order to help the community? In our own little way, we must try to become more aware and more sensitive of our surroundings. Being aware could be at least learning the terminologies that is being used. Sensitivity would mean as much as possible minimize using nouns or pronouns that could be too specific, such as girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, or wife. You could use partner. I only use the terminology husband when I'm talking to someone I know, but usually when I ask about someone's personal relationships, I usually use the term partner. So things like that. And I agree, some terminologies are not very familiar to us, and I would like to be able to share a bit of my research around this. So, LGBTQIA is a term that encompasses the entire spectrum of gender fluidity and sexual identities. L means lesbian, term for women sexually and romantically oriented toward other women. Gay, any person attracted to the same gender. So this doesn't only signify men who are attracted to men, but women as well. I recently came across from watching YouTube about Elliot Page, and if you don't know him, he was actually Ellen Page before. He is a Canadian actor and producer who has received various accolades, including an Oscar nomination, two BAFTA and Emmy nominations, and a Satellite Award. If you didn't know him, he was the actor to the titular movie Juno about teenage pregnancy, and he's recently in a Netflix series called The Umbrella Academy, and I'm actually wanting to watch this series after watching Schitt's Creek. But anyhow, so he recently came out as a transgender. It was back in December 2020. And in March 2021, he became the first openly trans man to appear on the cover of Time magazine. So, the thing with Elliot Page is before he came out as transgender, he came out as gay. By that time, he had a fiancée and wife, Emma Porter, and they were married for around 3 years, but then they actually divorced in 2021. So, because we don't know the specifics around this relationship, but In this dynamic, it's like Emma Porter was a lesbian because she was attracted to women. But then Elliot Page, back then when he was gay, he was attracted to women as well. But there might be a disconnect along the way when Elliot Page realized that he's actually a man. So then Emma Porter would not be romantically attracted to him anymore, if you know what I mean. So that's the dynamics around there, which is very, very sensitive and requires really full understanding about gender identity and gender expression. And B, for bisexual, those who are sexually and romantically attracted both to men and women. So, for example, Amber Heard, who had men and women partners, I felt that she could have even advocated for the LGBTQIA rights rather than the domestic violence and intimate partner violence survivors, as it is more applicable to her. So T can have several different meanings, but typically deals with gender identity. Some words could have slightly different meanings depending on the person and could be trans, an inclusive term for anyone whose gender identity does not match their sex assigned at birth. Transsexual can mean someone transitioning from one sex to another using surgery or medical treatments. And that goes with Elliot Page because he really transitioned from being gay to a transsexual where he went under medication. He had like hormone therapy, I believe, because now he looks very masculine if you compare his physical characteristics back when he was still Ellen Page. Transgender is also a term for someone who identifies as a different gender than what was assigned on their birth certificate. Q could be queer, which is an inclusive term of celebration of not molding to social norms or questioning when a person is still exploring their sexuality, gender identity, and gender expression. I is intersex, meaning individuals who don't fit into specific gender norms of woman or man. Can also be used for those with reproductive anatomy that isn't biologically typical. I think there was someone before in the news or something, they had both the male and female genitalia. So it could be like that. And A is asexual, who don't feel sexual attraction to either sex or don't feel romantic attraction in the typical way. The plus is a lot, which I will put into the episode notes, but the one that stood out most is gender fluid, which describes one's gender identity as self-expression and not static. And recently again, I came across the term pansexuality, which means the romantic, emotional, and or sexual attraction to people regardless of their gender. Like everyone else, pansexual people may be attracted to some people and not others, but the gender of the person does not matter. People of any gender identity can and do identify as pansexual. So you always hear about gender identity and sexual orientation, and a lot of people mistakenly think that they are the same, but they aren't. So sexual orientation is about who you're attracted to and who you feel drawn to romantically, emotionally, and sexually. It's different than gender identity. Gender identity isn't about who you're attracted to, but about who you are. Male, female, genderqueer, etc. This is separate from biological sex. Some children become aware at a very young age that their gender identity does not align with their physical sex characteristics, even expressing the disconnect as soon as they can talk. And this means that being transgender, where you feel that your assigned sex is very different, isn't the same thing as being gay, lesbian, or bisexual, if you know what I mean. I saw recently that JLo also has introduced one of her daughters, one of the twins, in their duet performance using a gender-neutral pronoun, which is they or them. I saw some comments on YouTube, both pro and against the introduction. I do get those people who are against the intro as they felt that this was just either a PR stunt to stay relevant, especially it was announced during Pride Month. or just a mom who might not be guiding her daughter enough. Or funny enough, they were saying that the kid might felt that she couldn't be as glammed up as her mom. That's why they have chosen to be on the other side. I mean, who knows? We will never know, right? We are not J-Lo and we are not Emma, her daughter. So who knows? It's maybe just the kid is just questioning or pansexual. Who knows? And J-Lo's daughter dressed up, for the lack of a better term, boyish. So who knows? Maybe the kid is still exploring their identity and might best to use a non-binary pronoun, right? But I do hope that the kid is not forced to mold into expressing their identity through fashion just because she identifies as non-binary. I really hope not. So kid, just be yourself. If you're exploring, that's okay. According to the LGBTQ plus Resource Center at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, gender-neutral pronouns are inclusive pronouns that do not associate any gender with the individual being discussed. Some languages, such as English, do not have a gender-neutral or third-gender pronoun available, and this has been criticized since in many circumstances, writers, speakers, etc. use he or his when referring to generic individual in the third person. Also, the dichotomy of he and she in English does not leave room for other gender identities, which is a source of frustration to the transgender and genderqueer communities. And speaking of language, that is also my frustration with the English language actually. Native English speakers actually think that I'm not speaking proper English because sometimes when I construct my sentence, I say he instead of she and vice versa. So, for example, I say Amber has some mental issues. He might need to go see a therapist. So, in this instance, I use the incorrect, commonly used pronoun for a person identifying as female or bisexual, as an example. One of the main reasons is that I'm not a native English speaker and my mother tongue actually uses gender neutral pronouns, which is pretty ahead of its time, don't you think? So kudos to the Filipino language as well as to my Cebuano dialect. My native tongue doesn't really have a gender-specific pronoun, and in order for you to know that you are talking about a male or a female is based on the adjective in the sentence. For example, in a sentence that would say, he is beautiful. Mind you, there are beautiful men. Cha Eun-woo, is that you? So in the Filipino language, we say, siya ay maganda or siya ay magandang lalaki. The word siya is a pronoun which is gender neutral, and maganda is a Filipino word for beautiful. Then we add the word lalaki, which is boy or male. So then you would know that the person is referring to a male. So there you go. Anyway, I hope you Zesties have learned a thing or two on this episode about Pride Month and how we can support the LGBTQIA plus community. Let's be kind to one another as human beings, support each other as fellow citizens of this world, no matter which race, gender, or socio-economic status we have. Easier said than done, right? But we gotta keep trying. If you like this episode, please rate, follow, or share to your friends and fellow Zesties. If you'd like to give me a cup of coffee or two, just head down to the episode notes to find out how. Shout out to our ever-supporting patron for the cups of coffee I have been drinking each month, Jem. So hi, Jem. Hope you are doing okay. Some Zesties have reached out to me that they enjoyed the show, so massive thank you. I'd be very excited to know your thoughts or episode recommendations. If you have some, feel free to drop me a note on my socials or email to gleefultalkshow@gmail.com. I'd be very happy to share them on the show. I'll see you next week.